All right, so today we're diving into a case that I think, well, it's safe to say it kind of shook everyone when it happened.
Yeah.
And it still brings up some, really tough questions about like justice and how we get things right or wrong.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those cases that just stays with you. The Central Park Jogger case from, what was it, 89?
89.
89, yeah. I mean, the story itself is just, well, it's heavy stuff. But then you add in all the media frenzy, the racial dynamics, the political players. It becomes this whole, like, tangled web that's hard to unravel.
Totally. So we've got some great sources to help us make sense of it all. We got the history take on it, a quick overview from Simple English Wikipedia, and then the deeper dive on, well, just regular Wikipedia.
Perfect. And our mission, right, is to really go beyond just the surface, you know? We're going to look at the key moments,
Hmm.
what went wrong, and what this whole thing tells us about, well, about us as a society, I guess.
Exactly. So to set the scene, let's talk about what happened on April 19th, 1989. Tricia Maley, she was 28, an investment banker, out for a jog in Central Park. Pretty normal thing, right?
Right. Yeah, seems like it. But she was attacked brutally. I mean, we're talking horrific. Found the next morning, and she was in a coma for almost 2 weeks. And when she woke up, she had no memory of the attack.
That's hard to even fathom it. And of course, everyone wanted answers. Who did this?
Right. And the police, they moved fast. 5 teenagers were arrested and ultimately convicted. Antron McCrae, Kevin Richardson, Yusuf Salam, Raymond Santana, and Corey Wise.
The Central Park Five.
The Central Park Five, yeah. They spent years in prison, sentences ranging from 6 to 13 years.
It's a long time.
It is. But then in 2002, everything changed. DNA evidence emerged, and it pointed to a convicted serial rapist, Matias Reyes.
Ah, the DNA. It's kind of like the truth teller,
Yeah, it really is in a lot of these cases. And Reyes, he confessed, said he was the one who attacked Melee. He was already in prison for, well, other horrible crimes.
So the five, they were exonerated. Their convictions were vacated, which basically means, like, legally, it's like it never happened.
Right. And the city, New York City, ended up settling with them for $41 million.
So let's go back to that night, to the crime itself. Our sources paint a really, I don't even know if there's a right word. It's a devastating picture of what Melly went through.
Yeah, it's tough to hear for sure. She lost something like 75% of her blood, had a fractured skull. She was beaten with a rock, tied up, raped. I mean, it's
Left for dead.
left for dead, yeah.
She even wrote about it all later in her book, I Am the Central Park Jogger. She talked about how, at first, everyone thought she'd have permanent brain damage, that she might not even make it.
It makes you think about the context of all this, right? New York City in 1989, our sources describe it as a super violent time.
Yeah, over 1,800 murders the year before.
Yeah,
So people were already on edge.
definitely. So this case, it kind of exploded in the media, right? This idea of a wolf pack, this group of like 30 teenagers running wild in the park.
Yeah, the New York Daily News was all over it, reporting on other attacks that night, even saying Melly was dragged off the path near the lock. Like, it painted this picture of total chaos.
And then there's this whole wilding thing. The cops told New York Magazine that the teens were using that word, that they were, laughing and singing wild thing in a holding cell.
Wild thing, like the song.
Yeah, like the Tone Look song. But some people later said that the cops kind of misinterpreted what the teens were actually saying. Like maybe it wasn't even about like being violent at all.
It shows you how a story can get twisted so fast.
For sure. And once that story gets out there, it's hard to get it back.
And the media, they weren't exactly helping, were they?
No, not really. It was a media frenzy. Our sources use words like tsunami to describe it. Everyone wanted the scoop, the latest details.
And the way the 5 teens were portrayed,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just awful. The Pointer Institute, they pointed out all these dehumanizing terms being used, like bloodthirsty, animals, savages, even human mutations.
It's shocking now to look back and see that, but at the time, it was everywhere.
And then you have people like Pete Hamill. He was a columnist for the New York Post. He wrote this piece that, well, it basically framed the attack as this racial and class war thing. He talked about the teens coming from a world of crack, welfare, guns, knives, and seeing wealthy white people as the enemy.
Yeah, that really added fuel to the fire. And then you have Donald Trump, who was already a big name in New York at the time. He took out these full-page ads in all the major newspapers.
Bring back the death penalty.
Yeah, bring back the death penalty, bring back our police. This was just weeks after the attack.
So the city was scared, angry, and these ads, they just fed into that.
Totally. It's important to remember that 2 of the 5, Kevin Richardson and Raymond Santana, they were actually arrested before Melee was even found.
Wait, what?
Yeah. They were picked up for unlawful assembly, held for hours before their parents were even called. The connection to Maylee's attack came later.
So they were basically just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
It seems that way. And then the interrogations. This is where it gets really, really messy. 4 out of the 5, all except Stephen Lopez, they confessed. On videotape.
But they later said those confessions were coerced.
Exactly. They said they were pressured, denied food and sleep. Some of them were interrogated for over 24 hours. Salam, he's talked a lot about that since.
And the confessions themselves, according to our sources, they were full of holes. Like details about the rape that just didn't add up.
Right, and there were no eyewitnesses placing them at the scene with Maylee, no DNA evidence at the time linking them to her, but they were still convicted.
In 2 separate trials in 1990.
Yeah. McCrae, Salam, and Santana, they were convicted of rape, assault, robbery, and riot. Richardson, attempted murder, rape, assault, and robbery. Wise, sexual abuse, assault, and riot.
Wow.
Yeah, and the sentences, they were heavy, 6 to 13 years.
So these 5 teenagers, they're now convicted. They're doing time for a crime they say they didn't commit. And it's all based on, well, what? Confessions that are shaky at best.
And a public that's, for the most part, convinced of their guilt. Remember, there was a lot of media attention on these trials. Our sources talk about how the jury in the first trial was racially diverse, how Maylee testified even though she couldn't remember the attack, and there were protests outside the courthouse.
Yeah, Salam, at his sentencing, he called it a legal lynching.
Powerful words, but it would be 12 years before the truth really came out.
2002, Matias Reyes, he's already serving a life sentence for other rapes and murders, and he confesses to the attack on Maylee.
And this time, there's DNA evidence to back it up. They had the evidence back in '89, but they didn't test it the right way to connect it to Reyes.
So finally, after all those years, there's proof.
Undeniable proof.
Wow.
And on December 19th, 2002, the convictions of the Central Park Five were vacated.
What a moment.
It was. And of course, they sued the city. Malicious prosecution, racial discrimination, emotional distress. It went on for years, but finally, in 2014, they settled for $41 million.
It's a lot of money, but can you really put a price on, 13 years of your life?
No, you can't. And it's interesting to see where they are now. Richardson's in New Jersey advocating for criminal justice reform. McCrae and Santana are in Georgia. Santana even started a clothing company, Park Madison NYC.
And Wise, he's still in New York City, also doing work around criminal justice reform. And then there's Salam. He was elected to the New York City Council in 2023. They were even invited to speak at the Democratic National Convention in 2024. It's amazing to see how they've turned such a horrific experience into something positive.
Yeah, they've become powerful voices for change. And Maylee, she's doing well too. Writing, public speaking, inspiring people. But even with the exoneration, there's still some controversy around this case.
Yeah, like Donald Trump, he still insists the 5 are guilty, even after the DNA and Reyes' confession.
He called the settlement outrageous and said, settling doesn't mean innocence. It's pretty wild considering the evidence.
It really makes you think about how hard it is to change your mind once you've decided on something, even when all the facts are staring you in the face.
Totally. And then there's the Armstrong report. This was an internal NYPD report from 2003, and it actually suggested that maybe both the 5 A&D Reyes were involved. They didn't totally buy that Reyes acted alone.
Hold on. So they're saying that even though Reyes confessed and his DNA was there, there's still a chance the 5 were involved.
That's what the report says, yeah. But a lot of people have criticized it, saying there's really no evidence to support that theory.
It just adds another layer to this whole, tangled mess.
It does. And then you have Maylee's perspective. She said publicly that she believes there was more than one attacker, and she regrets that they settled instead of going to another trial.
So she's not convinced of their innocence.
That's complicated.
It is. But it also brings up something important, right? This idea of media bias. The coverage of this case, it was so intense, so focused on the 5 teens. And then, at the same time, there was this brutal attack on a Black woman in Brooklyn, and it barely got any attention.
Yeah, it makes you wonder whose stories get told and how they get told and what role race plays in all of that.
The Central Park Five, their case, it really brought some huge issues to light, like racial disparities in the justice system, the problem of false confessions, especially from young people. It's heavy stuff.
It is. But it also led to some important changes, like laws requiring the recording of interrogations. That's a big deal.
So as we wrap up here, let's just take a minute to think about everything we've covered. The attack on Maylee, the wrongful conviction of the 5, their long fight for justice, and then finally, the truth coming out. It's a story about the power of evidence, the flaws in our system, and the resilience of the human spirit.
And it leaves us with some questions, right? Like, how do we make sure something like this never happens again? How do we fight against bias, both in the system and in ourselves? How do we, make sure that the pursuit of justice doesn't actually create more injustice?
It's a lot to think about.
It is,
Yeah.
but thinking about it, that's where it starts, right?
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a journey.
It has.
And to our listeners, keep those questions in mind. Keep learning, keep questioning. We'll see you next time.
See you then.